Hello, and welcome to another edition of Grown Folks Business. Just wanted to slide in here and say hello to everybody out there in the world listening and hopefully tuning in. And hopefully, you guys have gained some things from sharing this space with us. I know I have, and that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, gaining stuff. We're talking about what comes with gaining things in this thing called life if you're of a certain type of disposition, and that's wisdom. So tonight's topic is: does wisdom come with age, or is that just something we tell ourselves? Of course, we'll go a little deeper than that. And tonight, I'm glad to say that I have someone that I think is a pretty wise person joining me. And this won't be the first time. It's just been a couple of cats in here chopping it up, and I'm glad to do that with Jay Dwayne. I appreciate you making it in here tonight. I know it's not always possible for everyone to join, but it's nice to not be here by myself, just babbling and rambling. So, Jay, I thank you for being here, sharing the time. Danya, I appreciate you always doing what you do, keeping us on the air. We had a little technical hiccup on the way in here, and I hope that doesn't happen again. But glad to be here on this Thursday evening with everyone who's tuned in. And again, tonight we're talking about wisdom. It won't be the first time we've touched on this topic on the show, but this will be a more pointed conversation, and I think an opportunity for us and Jay Dwayne and I at this time to unpack what we think of wisdom being and how we think you gain it. So I'll start with the first question is, the topic itself. Does wisdom come with age, or is that something we just tell ourselves? So I know it's going to happen because it always does. And Jay, you one of the main culprits. You'll start answering the questions before I get to them, and that's okay. We're just going to have a conversation, mano y mano, and see where this thing goes. Because again, I recognize and salute your wisdom. Mary Carmen, good to see you. Good to hear from you. Hopefully you can chime in with a couple of notes in the type box. I think you're a pretty wise person too, Mary Carmen. So please feel free to use those fingers and say some words to us. Jay, does wisdom come with age, or is that just something we tell ourselves?
Whew. I do think that wisdom comes with age, but I don't think just because you are older, you are automatically wise. See, I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna do simple because I don't want to mess up.
Thank you. I'm glad you understand. But in that case, you're someone who I think sees it the way I do. It can come with age if you're a person that's willing to, accept some things that might make you a little bit more smart and able to get through this journey called life and become a little wiser. But you're right. I've seen people that are of a certain age that are not, you know, exemplifying anything that would be recognized as wise. But I will say this too: I've seen younger folks be very, very, very wise about certain things, and I've learned from younger people. I've said on the show before, my grandmother, who I miss and I love near and dearly, she would always say, "I'm always learning," and that's an important thing I think to wisdom, to gaining wisdom. But she said she was learning from everyone, not just the older folks, not the folks her age, but even those young, even myself. She would compliment me on that. So I appreciate that perspective, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. It can come with age, but some people do not. They don't want to get no wisdom. They just want to be here. Um, so, what is wisdom to you? How do you define wisdom?
That's funny. I was just about to ask you. I'm like, which way are we going with this wisdom thing? And I was going to ask you. Um, to me, I believe that wisdom is really um, the way that one processes um, experiences and knowledge and how it's being used. So I think it's a combination of experience and knowledge gathering and the process in which it's being used.
That is absolutely the answer. Experience and gaining knowledge from that experience, and not just going through hitting your head on the same door frame or the the same overhang and not getting the wisdom to understand that you need to walk around it, you need to duck or what have you. It's the age old adage: the stove is hot, and if you feel it when you touch it, you can look at it sometimes, or you can just know it's on and not take that chance or that risk. So I think some of that is the easier, lower hanging fruit in terms of defining wisdom. So agreed. Hey, I could definitely use wisdom every day as we learn from others if we are open to be a student. Absolutely. That's part of this thing. I think it's just the most intimate factor is being humble, having humility. That's how you gain anything, in my opinion, when it comes to an exchange of the unseen, the conversations you have, the interactions you have, to gain that self awareness to understand that there's an opportunity for you to progress in some manner that may not be material, may not be tangible, but it's inert. It's something inside. So I think that comes from that interaction. But I also believe wholeheartedly you have to humble yourself to be ready to receive that. And it doesn't have to hurt. It can just be a moment of understanding this is listening more so than talking. And I think that's an eternal thing. So what are the pieces to gaining uh, what are the pieces to gaining? Hold on, I'm trying to say this wrong. How do you solve the puzzle of wisdom gaining? What are the pieces to it? How do you have pieces that you think you put together to gain more wisdom, if that makes sense? I don't think it's just one big thing.
Well, let me ask you this first, because it's based off of something you just said. So you think that humility is a precursor to gaining wisdom?
I think it's a requirement. I think you have to have some humbleness about yourself to gain. I think that's one of those pieces to that puzzle. That's what I was trying to allude to. So I would definitely make humility a big piece of the puzzle in terms of gaining wisdom.
I guess I would. Well, I don't know if I'm a fan of that. Reason being, I think I do think that it does require some level of reciprocity. Um, and I don't know if you're saying that's why I'm kind of confused. Like, I believe that if you treat people like people, you can receive from people, and I don't think that it necessarily requires you to humble yourself in order to do that. I think that's just like seeing a person as a person and valuing a person and knowing that I'm always going to be gathering some type of information, some type of data throughout my life experiences. And people would learn from me and I would learn from people, which is more of reciprocity than me humbly sitting. Like, I do think there's times that you do sit and be a student of whatever, but I don't necessarily agree that wisdom is just, I don't think that humility is a gateway, because sometimes I feel like humility can also cripple people from receiving knowledge. Like, they sat under people and all it taught them was to be codependent. So that's why I want to know what you meant by the humility.
And that's a piece of the puzzle. Just like I firmly believe that the other aspect that you introduced, I think that's definitely just as important. You can be humble, you can be gracious, you can definitely be a person that understands that there is reciprocity in that exchange. But I think those are pieces to the puzzle. I do believe, and I love that we can have these debates, arguments, and what have you, and it's not that serious. But I do believe that being humble is a critical piece of that puzzle in terms of not just a defeated state, but an understanding that you are to be in receptitude of something valuable from someone else. And in order for me to believe that you can fully receive that, it is that you have to humble yourself. And again, I feel like you may be taking that as some defeatist type position, but it is one to be understood as an opportunity to grow and not remain in that same status, not remain in that point of I'm only here to learn. At some point, you should reciprocate that. If there's more to add, if the person that you're receiving potentially some lesson from, you see something that you can add to that, you're beholden to reciprocate. I totally agree with that, Jay. I think those are pieces to the puzzle. But continue. I'm definitely interested.
No, I guess it was more of like I think we need to unpack humility a little bit, because humility, and I'm saying, like, in this moment, it wasn't until it was said that in this moment I realized that maybe it's because people have exploited that term, and they'll tell you, like, you need to be humble, and there are generations of people who took a stance of humility but remained ignorant, meaning they gleaned from, quote unquote, their ancestors, and they sit there and got that knowledge, and the only thing that they really got was repeated ignorance, and it didn't help them, and it didn't help the generation after it. And it's like, well, I'm doing because so and so did this, you know. And then if you challenge, quote unquote, authority or challenge thought, is deemed as being disrespectful, and they would throw up, you need to be humble. You see what I'm saying?
I
So that's
totally
why I
get that.
wanted it.
No,
Yeah.
I totally get that from the perspective of whatever you, however you observed and interacted with that term, that's how you process it as soon as you hear it. But absolutely not. It's humility is, I believe, so important to living a decent life, to being a decent human being. But it is not that type of I'm gonna just say this to somebody and treat them a certain way, and you better humble yourself. Like, I'm gonna be a complete and total jerk to you, and you're gonna receive it just because I'm requiring that you be humble in the presence of your elders or in the presence of this great teacher. Absolutely not, bro. I've had interactions and with folks that think they are so deserving of respect, because that humility thing comes into that realm as well. And I always say it, Jay. I will never not say it. In order to get respect, you have to give respect. And that don't mean that you're going to always be receiving it the way it's intended, or giving it in the way that it's going to be received well. But that's the only way that you're going to ever deal with somebody like me. We're not going to start off where I'm supposed to come in and be all, yes, sir, I got to see what this, make sure that they good before I make sure I'm good. I'm speaking of the type of humility that exists in all spaces except those where it is not appreciated. And I think that's where we are at the end. Yeah, I'm totally not about performative humility, dog. I try to remain in the, and I've said this to you, you've heard me say this before, I try to remain in the eternal state of gratitude. To me, that's a part of being humble, just being, you know, glad to be here in some capacity and trying to be a decent human being. Humility plays a role in that. But no, man, I'm not about living on my knees or begging and pleading and hoping that somebody recognize and please, I'm good. Just can't you see it? No, bro. It's a mutual thing as well. Reciprocity plays a big role in that. You said that's an operative word for that piece of that puzzle. Are there any other pieces of the puzzle that you can think of off the top of your head as far as gaining wisdom?
Yeah. And I'm glad we're having that conversation, because I realize that some people use humiliation as humility, and they try to use them interchangeably. And I just feel like they're different. But yeah, I'm glad we talked about it, because I never really realized I had a kind of like a disdain for that term until this very moment. That so I'm actually processing it, because people will always tell somebody, especially, and I see it right now. I do see some level of ageism when we start talking about the intergenerational relationships. Individuals will assume that just because a person is younger, they have to earn, quote unquote, that respect or earn certain things. And I do feel like, me, I'm a little different. I feel like everybody gets respect, and you lose respect over time, or you get more respect. Um, I, I don't feel like you have to earn, like, if you start out with zero, if I don't respect you, I don't value you. That's me. And I know I get the sentiment, but I sometimes feel like it puts us in kind of like this elitist mindset when we feel like somebody has to earn certain things. And that could be hindering the true flow of a relationship that could organically happen. Um, which kind of goes into answering your question. Like, I think part of the puzzle to wisdom is also open communication. And when I'm talking about open communication, I'm talking about all aspects of communication, like what is being transferred. Um, not what is just being verbally, what is being spoken, like what is being transferred, whether it's through body language, whether it's through gestures, whatever it is, what is being communicated. And then after that's being communicated, how is that exchange going? Meaning, like kind of like how we did. We talked about humility. We can't assume that we look at this word the same way. The best way to gain more wisdom and to build stronger relationships is to say, okay, what did you mean by that? And I don't think that that happens a lot. I think it's just assumed knowledge, and I think assumed knowledge is based off of someone's assumed common culture, which is where we get the common sense from. But every common sense ain't common, and everybody don't have the same view of what is common.
So you said a good portion of what I would totally agree with, and Mary Carmen, I think he's correct also. So clarity, I think, is a piece of that puzzle, and understanding is what would that communication has got to be clear, and you have got to be attentive within that communication, and that piece of humility that I say is critical to that puzzle shows itself even in that, because you can't just, Jay, I know you dealt with some folks just like I have that will tell you what you're talking about when you can clearly trying to tell them that's not what you're saying. And they're, when you say that, I know what you mean. What? I'm telling you what I mean. So clarity is definitely critical to what I believe is gaining wisdom. Seeking to understand means challenging and asking the question that has limited your ability to process at that moment what might or might not be being said. Because if we continue talking and, like you said, didn't rectify the situation or to better understand what I was intending by humility, then we're not really talking. We've just kept going through a detour, a roadblock, and then went off the cliff, and it ain't progressive no more. And I love progressive communication, so absolutely. I will say to commingle how you were thinking of humility. I incorporate some ideas around how you were receiving it, and I do that when I recognize where I come from in my neighborhood as a child. Yeah, we were hard on each other, what they call running the dozens and what have you. So I do think it's also critical to not take yourself but so seriously, and also learn how to laugh at yourself inside of those situations. So we came up on that type of thing, and I think that may be alluding to some of the ways that you were receiving how I said humility. Yeah, you definitely gotta. I incorporate some of that though. You gotta be able to laugh at yourself to a certain degree. You can't be, always so serious that people can't relate to you. So sense of humor gotta be in there somewhere to some degree also. Did you have, yeah, go ahead. Got more pieces to the puzzle?
Well, I guess the problem that I have with some of these terms that have become constructural in context is that who becomes the definer of these things? And I think that that's where it's coming from, because it's like, we're kind of like going back to that. Remember that discussion we had about good, being a good person, but that's always left up to somebody else. Like, I can't really say I'm a good person. It'll be you, Felton, to say, oh, Jay's a good person. But we're like, well, what does that really mean? And I feel like humility is one of those things where I have seen where somebody will say, oh, that person struggles with being humble. And they could be very humble, but you could just not be a person that they can receive from for whatever reason. And I think a lot of times because we're talking about wisdom, people who are a little bit older, they have this definition of respect, and they assume that they automatically should be in that position of respect regardless of how they treat others. And so it's so frustrating because and if you oppose or reject certain ideologies or certain behaviors, then all of a sudden you're either disrespectful or you're not humble, in that regard. And that's not true. Like, because you talked about assumptions, There are so many people that assume they know what Love is a Parable is about. And they have never taken a class, never went to a workshop. And so there are people who give me advice who I respect. Yes, they may be millionaires. They may have helped multiple businesses be successful. But how can you guide me on what I'm doing if you've never experienced what it is that I am presenting? Wisdom tells me to reject your counsel on certain things if you haven't experienced the very thing that makes me different. So if we're talking about my niche and you're coming in and you're telling me to change my niche, then that lets me know I have to reject your counsel or your knowledge because it's not wise knowledge. It's assumptive in theory. And I was just because I met with one of my mentors today, and I told him, who happens to be a white male, and I said, white males are the only ones who constantly tell me to change the name of the organization. But here's the flip side. All of my business have come because people said, I came across Love is a Parable and I found myself fascinated. So if I change it and I just have a generic name, what make me Love is a Parable is no longer there. So I have to sit there, take the information, but I can't say I disagree because then I'm not being humble. But I just have to reject the knowledge and just not entertain it, even though I'm sitting in that presence. And it's a constant conflict because you're dealing with it. And I'm looking at them and saying, you're not wise because you're not taking the time to even examine what it is that I'm giving you. Before giving me some thought, you're just assuming I'm like everyone else. And I feel like wisdom doesn't do that.
Yeah. So I think you're showing some wisdom in how you receive what they're offering. And I would argue that if they're not offering advice with a question, then it is already at a point of being offered that you should discern to look at it with a little extra scrutiny. Because if they're entering into a discussion with you about something that you know of, that you know about, that you know what it is, and they don't come with a question inside of that, there's a lack of humility on their part because they're receiving new knowledge, new information. And if they're not complimenting it with a question and saying, well, can you tell me exactly what it is so that I better understand how I might want to respond to whatever. If they just come in with what you're saying, and we know what assuming does, makes it in the first three letters out of you. So if you're not coming from a place of, I'm curious to learn more about that, let me hear from you about what I'm missing, or I got this question to fill in that blank. That's important. And it's not shaking your head and saying, well, this is what I think you should do before you even finish explaining what it is you're about. But you also said something else that I think is important, and some people may need to hear it who are a little older. That respect thing is not automatic, and it does require real reciprocity. And that's why I said earlier, give respect. To get respect, you got to give respect. I have dealt with those relatives and those older citizens who will make it seem like they can hurt you. Hey, you're going to respect me. I'm your elder. What does that mean? And matter of fact, I want to say we had a show on that some time ago, Jay, and it was, literally about this expectation of respect for just growing old. Have you done anything to warrant respect, or did you just happen to be here for a while? What makes you worthy of that respect? And I'm certain that show had respect in it, but I digress. I think that what you're saying in terms of business dealings has a place in this conversation, but it is not the life conversation. When you're having those exchanges in business, man, you can't tell what somebody's motives are. You don't know what they really are spending time with or how much they really care about and all of that good stuff. But I do believe that there's something to be gained even from an exchange like that, Jay. There's some wisdom you gain in that exchange, even if it wasn't overt and intended by the person you were talking to. You got something from it. You got something you want to add? Go ahead.
No, I feel like, oh, you wanted to read that? Gonna read that one. Gonna read it, bro. Yes, it's a challenge to communicate correctly, and understanding culture is important since it can give wrong or inappropriate message. Even that learning is most needed. Wisdom. I agree. I definitely agree with that.
Thanks for reading it. I was reading it with my mic muted, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah. I was like,
what is he doing?
I couldn't see that my mic was muted. That's what was throwing me off. But no, absolutely, great comment, Mary Carmen. Go ahead, Jay.
But I do think that what happens is that people draw from their personal experiences and shape that into business. What do I mean by that? Like the most successful person, like if you're successful in business, you feel like that automatically gives you a right to speak on things because you're like, well, I'm successful. I have, this multi-million-dollar company and I've been doing this for all those years. And that's like, that may be true. And so the same thing happens in the real world. A person feels like, okay, because I'm married, I've been married for 30 years and I have these kids and these grandkids and I have these houses and I have, all this property and I go on vacations. I have a right to just speak on your life without doing an assessment. And a lot of us are redefining that. Like a lot of people think that I'm younger than what I am. A lot of people think I'm in my 30s. So when they find out that I'm in my 40s, I get more respect. But I don't get that initial respect when you thought that I was in my 30s. And that's a huge problem. Meaning you should give, like my grandma say, a dog deserves respect. So you should give a person respect because they're human. In your relationship, as that grow and as you get more things, wisdom will guide you on how to treat a person. You know what I mean? And I just feel like sometimes people some of these, they take stances of assumption and assume that certain things should be granted to them without doing any work. And I don't care how old you are, you're going to have to do some work, whether it's in business, whether it's in a personal life. Get to know a person before you just start to impart or feel like there's something you want to glean from a person.
Yeah, I totally, that resonates completely, man. I totally observe how much we give attention and some points of perspective to people who just happen to have money or fame or popularity. And that does not mean that they know something about everything. But that's generally how we try to prop them up in society. But because of what you just said, I'm going to jump ahead to another question. And I think this will be a fun answer based on what I already understand you don't think affords one the label of being wise. So how do you know when you're dealing with a wise person? Do you have things that you observe that let you understand that this person is somebody I deem as being pretty wise?
Ooh, ask me that one more time. One more time.
How do you know when you're dealing with the wise person?
You said something else too with that.
I said a whole lot of stuff. So that was the crux of the question. So based on what you said, that made me leap ahead to that question because you seem to understand when you're not dealing with the wise person based on some of the stuff that you just said. Now that's kind of what I prefaced it with. So how do you know when you are dealing with the wise person?
I guess I feel like I don't feel like wisdom is just like a large umbrella. I know we use it as an umbrella, but I think that a person can be wise in one area and totally ignorant in another. And I think it will be wise of you to kind of know the difference. And I think it goes by what a person produces. And it's not always the physical fruit either. Because a lot of times people will look at, like you talk about wealth. Because some people may not have anything materialistic, but that loss taught them so much. And so they're able to give you so much of value. And I say, to me, it comes through relationship. And that relationship doesn't have to be always intimate. That relationship can be some type of exchange, meaning when I first came on the show, I didn't know you or Bob or Lisa, but I can tell a lot of things that you guys are wise in. And that's through the relationship that we were establishing. And when we talked about certain topics, I saw where that wisdom was coming from. Now, did I see the manifestation of that? No, because we met in person later. So I really feel like it's an exchange of relationship that will tell you, and that's why I was big on the transfer, and that's why I'm big on communication, because it's an exchange. If I'm not getting anything from you, I don't feel like it's wisdom. It's a wisdom thing. I feel like we can give random knowledge to individuals because you have a whole bunch of people that know random facts, but wisdom is a little bit more substantive. And I feel like in a wisdom exchange, you will feel the weight of that wisdom being transferred. And it's
Absolutely.
case by case. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I'm not talking about just being knowledgeable, as you stated. Somebody can be very knowledgeable on something. You can say they're wise about knowing how to fix cars. They know about how to fix cars, but some other life things that encompass that or are encompassed under that umbrella of wisdom, that might not be what they're about. So on a base level, when I perceive someone as being wise, it's generally based on a couple of things, and they have a lot to do with communication. But one of them is listening. Like active listening to me is an indicator of there being some pieces of wisdom, those puzzle pieces existing in that person. Um, Meaningful responses, not the thing that I want to hear, but the thing that lets me know that you're actually paying attention and processing what's being discussed. Not a lot of, bro, some of the most wise seeming people know how to talk without saying anything. And they respond to stuff that ain't even what you're talking about. So the seeking of clarity, that thing we were discussing earlier, I think that's an indicator. I think that's a puzzle piece for someone who's wise. Uh, I like to think that when someone can, when you can witness someone deal with adversity and they don't allow it to just break them, they don't get all bent out of shape in some way that is counterproductive to actually dealing with the situation. I think that affords itself some connection to showing elements of wisdom. Um, which I have another good question I want to get to. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on that before I do?
Well, it's so much that you're saying that I think it's so relevant to show the complexities of humanity. And I think one of the things that we don't spend enough time when you talk about communication, like I feel like active listening is part of the communication thing. That's why I get upset when people use certain things as if they're independent. Like it was this meme that's going around saying we don't need people to improve their communication skills. You need to worry about their comprehension. And I'm like, that's part of communication. But it sounded profound to people. And so another point of knowledge, and somebody thought that was like mind blowing and like, yeah, I can talk all day, but they're not comprehending. But okay, that's part of communication. If you are transferring something and the person is not receiving it, something is happening in that transfer, and we don't necessarily know who's at fault here because colloquialism plays a whole role. Lived experiences play a whole role in how we look at things. And I feel like sometimes we lump things together, which goes back to the transfer. We lump things together and assume just because you commonly do it, it's commonly known among the masses. And that's not necessarily true. And that's why I get sometimes a little frustrated with people who slight people because they don't have similar lived experiences as one feel that they should.
Yeah, I equate that to so many things. Regionally speaking, I mean, if you grew up 30 miles different from somewhere else, the slang is different. The thing that you think everybody knows about, you only wear your one pants leg cuffed, and the other one you got to leave straight, and it's the left one. When we growing up, you got all of these little geographically focused ways of interpreting how cool you are or displaying how cool you are for it to be interpreted. And you mess around and go somewhere else, and they looking at you like you're crazy. When I was a kid, we would go to Connecticut and sometimes go to New York, go shopping at Macy's, and think we getting the flyest and dopest thing, and come back down south, and everybody looking at us like, man, where you get them things from? What British Knights, when they first came out, get down south, everybody, what you doing with them ugly shoes on, man? What are those? And then a couple years later, they everywhere. But that's just the nature of that thing. And you're absolutely right. You resign yourself so much, and see, that brings humility back into it. That's the humility thing, not in the way that we finally got to the point of understanding how I mean it in this space. But that's that humility thing. You can't know everything. You can't be everywhere, and you can't be the decider of what's cool and what's not, what's in and what's hot. You gotta just understand that you don't know, and that clarity has to be had, especially in that exchange. And you grow from that. And I think you do grow wiser. But I want to go to this place that you and I have had some disagreements on at certain points. So I'm going to ask you, do feelings and emotions hinder or enhance the opportunity to become wiser? I know that's a both and question, but I know you're going to have something to say about it. So do feelings and emotions hinder or enhance the opportunity to become wise?
I feel like if you lack the experience or the knowledge, you lack the experience in the knowledge of who you are, it can very much be a hindrance. I think as you go on this journey and you get to know yourself better and you acquire knowledge, I think that your feelings and emotions can be tools of wisdom, only if you know yourself well. If you don't know yourself well, it definitely can be a huge hindrance. And I think, look, going back to this humility thing, it's not really the humility part that I think I have, because I'm still processing. It's not the humility. I think it's the codependency, because some people are lazy livers. And I mean that for a reason. Like, they just go through life wanting other people to live their lives for them. They take these different positions as if they're gleaning knowledge, but really there is a higher level of laziness that is there that they don't want to deal with. And I think that sometimes we are waiting on people to tell us how we should feel, how we should respond, how we should look at things. And we haven't spent a lot of time being intimate with ourselves to know what we're feeling, why we feel that way, why do we see life that way. One of the things that I talk to my mom all the time about with my older siblings, she had 4 boys, and we all look at life totally different, but yet we do things very similar, but in the adverse effect. And I feel like,
what do you mean? What do you mean in the adverse effect?
Like, for instance, we have a huge family. The younger 2 of the family, like my mom is 20 out of 21 siblings. So the younger 2, me and my brother that's right above me, we are more antisocial. We understand the importance of family, so we will know the history of who everybody is, but we may not be around you. Whereas the older 2, they really like being around family. You know what I mean? But where we're all very similar is, even though they like family and we may not like family, we all live far away from our family. Like, all of us live in 4 different cities in 4 different states. You know what I mean? And nobody you can just come to. Like, we're like either 8 and 6 hours away from one another. And that's a result of what we all talk about is, yes, even though they appreciate family and I appreciate the knowledge of family and I appreciate learning about family, we all seen how family for overall how they treated my mom, and she broke her back for that family. And so one thing that we all have in common is we're not breaking our back for anybody. Because you had older people who assumed because they were your aunts and even your grandparents that they could just talk to you any kind of way, or it's due respect. Or you had individuals that felt just because they're family, they could just take something without asking for it. And no, a thief is a thief. It don't matter who you are, no matter what blood run through it. And we realize that all of us have very similar experiences, but some of us have an adverse effect to it, where some of us just go with the flow. And my older siblings are more forgiving, but my older siblings, are you talking about someone who's 56 and 55 years old? And that's also generational. So the younger crew is like, no, we're not taking that. It's not that I'm holding a grudge. It's now you've shown me who you are, and I'm going to treat you as such. So stuff like that.
No, so there's some wisdom that was gained in that life experience is what I'm hearing. And you've kind of unpacked through your self-actualization what it actually was and how it came to be and why these siblings may function on a level that's closer to yours and why these don't. I would make an argument for that entitled wisdom that or that entitled respect. Let me say that part that I think older folks uh, lean on in Black American life. I think so much was a struggle, historically speaking. So much was a struggle. So much is a struggle that one of the things that became inherent and expected was some measure of respect just for being older and just for being having experienced life a little bit longer. I think that was one of the things of value that came out of the Black American experience that is held on to or has been held on to. I don't know if it exists in the same way it once did, Jay. I know when we were coming up, we're close in age. I know when we were coming up, that thing was real. That older uncle, that older auntie, that grandma, that there was an expectation of respect, and it was enforced by our parents. I don't know if it's still the same. You got kids. I don't know if it's in that same vein, but I think there's a history associated with it that has to do with some of the experience in the Black community.
I agree, and I agree, and I think that's also. I was always a rebel too. You disrespect me. I don't. It didn't matter. It didn't matter how old it is. And if my mom was here, she'll tell you like, yeah, he's pretty much been the same. Because I feel like anybody is owed respect and anybody is due respect, but you don't disrespect someone and think that you are automatically going to get respect. And I think that that's a huge conversation that we need to have. And I think that there is a lot of people who are of age who haven't understood that. Meaning you can't be disrespectful to someone and say, respect your elders. No. At this point, you are just an old child. But you can't be disrespecting someone, and someone needs to tell you, like, hey, this is, and it's not disrespect to tell you something, like to give you a corrective action. That's not disrespect. Meaning telling you that you're disrespecting me is not me disrespecting you. You know what I mean? Look, now this is feelings. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely a fact. And I don't want to cut you off, but that humility thing comes back into play. You cannot resign yourself to, I'm going to command respect. And when somebody challenges you on that, you resign yourself further to that than you do the moment that it could take for you to understand why you're missing this moment that you could garner some respect or adoration or appreciation. Jay, we're 1,000% on the same page when it comes to being that outlier. I remember going back and forth with my great uncle at one time, and this was my great uncle, and he was like, "You're not gonna disrespect me." And I might have been 15 years old, and I'm like, dude, to give respect, you got to give respect. You are a child. I'm like, I might be, but I'm not disrespecting you. So don't disrespect me. Don't treat me with malice, malcontent, dismissiveness, and expect me to just be like, oh yeah, I'm here and I'm gonna always. No, we're gonna have to rectify that before we continue down any path. So I'm totally in 1,000%. Which if you had a thought you wanted to complete, go ahead.
No, I definitely agree with you. I remember when I was in ministry and I was a licensed minister, and I went home, and my auntie said something that was biblically incorrect, and she was a pastor. My bad, she was an apostle, and I remember her saying something, and I just said that's incorrect. And my dad went off, how you gonna disrespect her? She been preaching for 30 years and blah blah blah. You don't disrespect the pastor. I'm like, I'm one too. You a child and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, but I didn't disrespect. I just said that's incorrect. I didn't. And so I do feel like a lot of that framed me, because one thing that wisdom has taught me very early on is I'm not going to argue with nobody on something I know that's right. So I'm quick with the okay. Okay. If you want to live in your ignorance, that's okay. And that's why a lot of times when people want me to step up and say certain things to resolve conflict, I'm not finna get caught up in somebody's internal war. It's too many casualties of somebody else's internal war, and you sitting there shot, beat up, and bruised because somebody else is having a mental crisis or a personal conflict that has nothing to do with you. And so, yeah, I those are things, and you did clarify, and I finally got it. Look, at the end of the show, you're saying a reciprocity of humility. Meaning, no matter the age, both, whoever it is, we must all be humble.
Man,
It finally came. It finally came.
Hey, bro, better late than never. And I knew it would, because you're a wise guy, which I would say that. And that brings me to my last question. And I truly want you to take the time to think about this. If you have the ability to truly answer this without being too big headed, be humble in your answer, is what I'm saying. Have some humility with this answer. But do you consider yourself wise?
Dog, that's tough. I feel like I'm wise in certain things, and I feel like I'm ignorant in others. Hence why I have mentors. Um, what I have to do a better job of is advocating those things that I am wise in versus allowing people to kind of come into those sanctuaries of wisdom that I have reserved for myself. So I think that I'm both. I think that I'm wise in certain areas and I'm ignorant in others.
No, I think that's the only answer. I think the wise answer outside of that, which is the same, is the one that I resign myself to. Is I know that I'm wise enough to know that wisdom requires eternal learning. So I'm wise enough to know that part. As soon as I start thinking I know it all, then I think that's when wisdom goes out the window. I'm wise enough to know that it requires me to be in a position of eternal learning. And again, I thought that we didn't say humility. I should have put humility in the name of the night show, but that's absolutely a fact. You have to be in a position of receiving, not just everything. You have to use that discerner. You know about that from the biblical perspective. You got to sift it out, but you have to be in a position of receiving and understanding, and then sharing. If you know a shorter route to a popular destination, you should offer some of that to a friend or a stranger that you meet that's trying to find that place. You giving them a easier path, hopefully, and it's sharing of something that you learned. It's just that simple. So in this case, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Jay, but there's a book, and I've said it on this show before. I'm very selective about who I share things like this with, because not everybody is going to be in a position of receptive to certain information and the potential growth from it. They'll use it as a secret weapon sometimes. But you probably already know about it. The Four Agreements, I think, is a good work that really lends itself to what we've discussed so far. And, one of those Four Agreements is don't assume. That part is critical, I think, to being able to really deal in this thing called life without getting too consumed with reactionary tendencies and things of that nature. Seek to understand. Like, if you don't assume, then you actually are given the time and the breath needed to better understand the moment that's being encountered, or the person that's being encountered, as opposed to rushing to some conclusion that might not even be it. And I think we're better when we take that time. So, last question. Can you recognize moments where you've leveled up? Do you have any moments that you've leveled up towards being more wise?
Yeah, I think that I'm in that place now. And I talked about this before. When you were, and this is not to pick at the church or anything like that. But growing up in the religious South, people always tell you about your gifts, but no one tells you about the potency of your gifts. You learn that throughout life. People will tell you how talented you are, even in your community, but no one tells you about the potency of your talent. That's why we have singers on a spectrum. Me and my best friend were just talking about this, like talking about Sierra's voice, who I think Sierra can sing. She's just a soft soprano. But would you compare her to a Fantasia? No. Why would you even do that? And I think a lot of times, a lot of us have so many gifts, and those who have potent gifts in certain areas get certain reactions out of people, and it can develop insecurities. So a lot of my insecurities came from being gifted and talented, but not wanting to make other people feel bad. But now I'm at a place where I need to rely on these gift, skills, and talents that I have if I want my organization to survive. And so I have to make the conscious effort now in my life to pursue these gifts and be confident within them. And now I do see the difference because I am seeing a success that I didn't see before. I was trying to get all of these people on board and make it all a collective unit, and it wasn't. This is my season to really exercise the full extent of my gift, skills, and talents to see where I can go before asking for help. And I have experienced a level up, even though it does feel uncomfortable because this is the first time that I'm stretching myself by myself and it feels so weird. But I have seen the results of that.
Yeah, you can't. What is it? You can't grow if you don't stretch, and it can be painful. Man, I'll say in my limited time of interacting with you and more in this virtual space than actually in real life, uh, I see it, and I say the same to Lisa. And I wish she was here to further unpack that. We might have to revisit this topic for her because I think it's a witnessable act. I think it is something to behold. Um, and I'm not saying that from some omnipotent positionality. I'm hopeful that you see something in me also. I mean, it is observable though. It is really um, a maturity. It is a witnessable uh, height change. It's a witnessable transformation if you pay attention to a person enough because they've evolved. That's that leveling up. That's that really like, well, I know for a fact that this situation, this interaction used to go this direction. I never wanted it to. I always want to get along with this person, but I know it usually goes this way. The first time you start to observe any change in that direction, it is not just you that's doing it. There is some growth there. And I hope it can be recognized as some wisdom because at some point we all going to need each other. If you know somebody and they're important to you, you're going to need them in some capacity, even if you don't know, even if you don't even know that you're needing them at that moment. It's just going to happen. I'm going to leave that there. I appreciate you hanging around for me for this hour and really, I think having some wonderful words of wisdom exchanged. I appreciate you, Jay. So you have a wonderful night. Danya, thanks for doing what you do. Mary Carmen, thanks for joining and also leaving some good words of wisdom on the screen. Appreciate you. You guys take care. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all. Take care.